Hello there, friends, and welcome back to Sesh Cast. My name is Goldilocks. This is Sesh Cast, a cannabis podcast for cannabis sessions. And today I come to you, sober and live in my car. I'm on my way to work because your boy pre-produced this really great interview episode for today. And on the day he was supposed to load it, realized that he forgot to record an intro and an outro. So here I am on my way to work doing that now on my phone. So I'm very sorry if this sounds a little wonky. I'm going to try and put a decent noise filter on it because my car is hella loud. Not because it's like a nice muscle car or anything, because it's an old car that does not have a good exhaust system. But that's neither here nor there. Like I said, my name is Goldilocks, and this is a cannabis podcast, and typically I'm high by now, and I'm very sober because it's 9:30 in the morning and I got to work for the next 8 hours. But again, neither here nor there. Today's episode is this little project that I put together with my good buddy Steve Cominski from the Baked and Awake show. We recorded this interview about a week ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And it's less an interview and more an open discussion between the two of us, talking about our experience at Seattle Hempfest. And you may be saying, now, I listened to a Hempfest episode on this podcast already, and it was just you talking a bunch of stickers. And if you said that, you're right. This is different. This is Steve and I talking a little bit about our experience at Hempfest this year, Hempfest as a whole, some of the struggles that Hempfest is having, and some ideas that we wanted to throw around that we think maybe could help Hempfest. And we just wanted, as two informed people in the community and someone who has been to Hempfest multiple times than myself, who had only been this year, just wanted to talk about it openly a little bit and say, I think that there's a lot of things that Hempfest is doing great, but I think that there are a lot of things that Hempfest could do better. And so we just wanted to be the ones to put that out there. And it comes from no place of malice. We love Hempfest. We had a blast at Hempfest. And we're very hopeful that Hempfest can turn some of its struggles around and grow back into the protestival that it was maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. But ever since I-502 passed, Hempfest has sort of been on the downhill. And so we wanted to throw our thoughts out into the ether to say, hey, here are our opinions. Hopefully someone can listen and maybe take something from this. So I want to say first and foremost, thank you to Steve for sitting down and doing this discussion with me. I also want to say huge thanks to you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this discussion. Whether you were at Seattle Hempfest, whether you've been to Seattle Hempfest before, whether you've never been to Hempfest, I think that this discussion is a little bit interesting because it brings together some information and some mindsets from Steve as someone who works in the I-502 cannabis industry in Washington and specifically in the Seattle-Tacoma area, as well as my experience from the radio industry and someone who spends a lot of time at assorted festivals. So it's just kind of an interesting discussion. I would love it if you would let us know what you thought. Steve gives all of his show and contact information, both in the beginning and at the end of this podcast. And so I would really give you the recommendation to check out his show as well. It is one of my favorite podcasts out there. It's called the Baked and Awake show. It's sort of a show about cannabis, conspiracies, and you, I think is his elevator pitch. And I really, really enjoy it. It's been one of my favorite podcasts since day one when I started doing this show and we connected via Reddit. So, Steve, thank you again, my friend, for sitting down with me. I really, really appreciate it. I had an absolute blast working on this with you. And I hope that everything goes well for you and your show and your family out there in Seattle. And thanks again for being a really excellent host to us while we were out there. Steve and I spent a lot of time together at Hempfest. We wanted to connect, and we were finally able to connect. And this is the episode that we all promised you that we were going to record while I was out there and then didn't. So here it is, recorded over the internet from across the country because we were having too much fun smoking weed in the park. So without further ado, my discussion with Steve Cominski of the Baked and Awake podcast, RE Hempfest. Oh, also, my real name is Matt.
Well, welcome back to Sesh Cast,
as I throw my bowl pick across the room. Today, joined by Steve of the Baked and Awake Show, my friend from the Podcast Builders League, who I've talked about often, who I flew to Seattle to see, and we made tons of plans to record, and then ended up spending 4 days without ever sitting down to record. And so here we are a week later, recording via the internet.
Matt, good to be here with you, buddy.
Glad you're here, man. So let's start with what's important. What are you smoking on today?
What do I got? Oh yeah, we found out about it. It's a new strain for me, and I'm excited about it. It is called ADAK OG or ADAK OG. I'm not sure how the kids say it out on the streets of Alaska, but evidently this is a, if I recall, Matt, Alaskan Thunderfuck and AK-47 cross.
I believe that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty excited about it, and it's indoor. It's from Western Washington here, not far from where the garden that I work for is located down in Tacoma. It's called Narrows Cannabis. So I'm gonna go with ADAK OG.
All right? I like that. ADAK.
I don't see how you'd want to say ADAK all the time.
No.
So.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Great.
So there we go, and I'm digging it. I sampled a bowl, but now we have a joint rolled up for the session. Nice. So,
and I've got Jack Herrera and Agent Orange, and I think Jack Herrera is in this bowl, and hopefully I'll get to both of those by the time we're done. That would be ideal.
There we go.
So today we have come together largely in part because of our experience at Hempfest, not only our experience at the festival itself, but also just our experience of hanging out and spending some time together, and a mutual interest in creating some content and recording a podcast together. And so for those of you who are familiar with my show and may not be familiar with Steve's, if you want to give us a quick rundown on Baked and Awake, I think that would be appreciated.
Rad. So first off, as you know, I love your show, and your show has, kind of in some small ways influenced some of what I do with the smoking portion of my show, for sure, which we've talked about a little bit. Because I love the lo-fi session vibe that you got going on, that whole sort of steez. And I try to weave a little bit of that into what I do over on my pod. Been doing Baked and Awake for close to a year. And for those of you who care to stop by and check it out, I live here in the Pacific Northwest, and I work in the legal industry. I'm also a medical patient and grow a couple of plants here at home myself. And on the podcast, we talk about cannabis, obviously, and also conspiracies, quote unquote. Matt can see the air quotes I'm making here right now. And as I say in my elevator pitch, and you. So it's social commentary to an extent. I track on a lot of slightly fringe news topics and things, and just stuff that is of particular interest to me based on, where I'm at in the country, and, my interests, of course, being, cannabis legalization and reform of justice system laws as pertains to cannabis, things like that. Not to misrepresent and act like I'm some super effective activist or advocate or anything. At best, I'm a guy who's dimly aware of the fact that not everything is super peachy, and trying to parse it almost weekly, right, on the pod in some meaningful way. So,
Great.
That was a long ass explanation. Now you've had the whole podcast, everybody. You're good. You don't even need to forget it.
It's all you'll ever need.
Stay here at Sesh Cast. You're golden.
So it's funny enough too that we connected very early on in my podcast. I mean, you've been around with me since episode 1, via Reddit, and then back over to the Podcast Builders League, which has been a fun way to build connections of a bunch of podcasts around. I actually just recorded an episode right before I did this, and was talking about Eli from Not So Crazy, And we both have shared a bunch of mutual podcast friends, so it's good to finally get together and add our own collaboration to the pile of Podcast Builders League collaborations, because so many people have done them, and
It is
here
so
we are,
rad.
two of the main cannabis podcasts in the group who have not yet sat down together.
We really are. I mean, frankly, there's a lot of, and I'm actually delighted that there are so many other pods in our group that even fuck with it at all. But both of us are probably the only two that are, overtly, top line, Front Street. We're focused on that. We're fucking with that week in and week out. And I know I debated before I launched the podcast, because I wasn't sure. First off, if I needed to be that kind of advocate and identified, on that level with this subject matter, and then, am I good enough to do it too, right? But I figure in the case of both of ours, you look at all the other content that we see out there on YouTube and everywhere else, and I always appreciate a new episode of your show because it's just like, it's non-commercial. It's about the weed and the weed experience. And, it's about the companionship that you so often associate with the cannabis experience. And it's funny that you're doing it in a box, usually, pretty much alone. I don't think have you had any guests on yet besides me?
One other.
Right?
One.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, but for the most part, it's alone, but it's a beautiful thing because you're not alone. It's just a remote session with everybody, but at any rate, PBL friends who are listening, we love all of you guys. And I think, this is just one of, I hope, many collaborations, not only with you, but with everybody else, as needs must, and as ideas come together, and as people are like, you love pinball machines from the 70s too? Let's go, man. Whatever it might be, it is neat, having that community to connect with, for sure. And obviously Eli's, hugely central to that whole community and culture. So everybody who's listening, if you happen to be a podcaster at all, find us on Facebook at the Podcast Builders League, and you can hang out with us there.
Good pitch. Well pitched. But it's interesting too that you say, like, we are the two with the cannabis as a key factor, as a theme to our regular shows.
Right.
And here we are in a world where that's becoming such a mainstream thing. And I think there are 3 main shows on Netflix alone that I can think of that are cannabis-centric shows that aren't just documentaries, that aren't just Narcos seasons or anything like that, that are much more like, you have Cooking on High, you have
which I've yet to watch. I have been eyeballing the thumbnail. I'll peek at it soon.
It wasn't what I wanted it to be, but it wasn't bad.
Okay.
And then you have Disjointed, which was hotly contested on people's opinions. I enjoyed it for what it was, but at the level of what it was. But at the end of the day, we're seeing cannabis content come into the mainstream and start to be a genre and start to be a space that can be filled. Maybe soon a drop-down category on iTunes, where you have your craft beer podcast, you also have your craft cannabis podcast. You have your lifestyle podcast, you have your cannabis lifestyle podcast. There is just so much opportunity today for that to come out, and it's interesting to me that this is happening so quickly in the digital mainstream and in arguably pop culture, while on the legal side and on the logistical side, there's still so much to be fought for and so much to be done and improved upon, while we are really showcasing the advancements that we've made. We are also in this weird corner where a lot of advancements need to be made and aren't being made, aren't being given attention to. And that's interesting. I think that both of us sit in this spot where we are both trying to accomplish the same thing, being to add content to the cannabis space and to add educated content to the cannabis space, and to add content to the cannabis space that someone else who may not have the same experience with weed, with pot, with drugs, with whatever it may be that we do, we can improve their experience and give them whatever sort of guidance they need, whether directly or indirectly through this experience. And I think
Yep.
there's a really important place in the world for that.
I also think, and I need to remind myself constantly, that at about a year in, which you're approaching that sometime soon, right? Next month or two.
January, yeah.
I feel like I'm just getting started with that, and I'm, hoping to raise my personal bar this next year with the content that I create and spend more time writing, for the pod. So, um, I guess what I'm saying there is there's people who have been in this space for a decade already, and I mean the digital media side too of cannabis. Some of these YouTubers and some of these podcasters have been doing it for years, and they undoubtedly have grown greatly in their process and their knowledge and their capabilities over that time. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just as excited about it now a year in as I was when I started. So I also don't have any delusions that having done it for a year that I'm even close to an expert, right? So,
Yeah.
got a lot to learn. Got a lot to learn about like how to make quality content for folks so that it is relatable, so that somebody who maybe is just stuck trapped in a room or in a car somewhere with some stoner who's listening to the podcast, and who's not about it at all, is maybe slightly pleasantly surprised at what they encounter on the pod.
Yeah, and but that all that being said, and constant drive for improvement as an important thing to be noted, I have always really enjoyed your show. I've always liked your show as something that I can listen to on at any time of day. Often, when I'm doing things or when I'm at work, because if I listen back to my own show pretty regularly just to hear what I sound like, and
got to.
like if it's the middle of the day while I'm at work, often I struggle to listen to my own show because I'll put myself to sleep or I'll lose myself in my own thoughts because I'm at a stonier level of content to speak than often sometimes your show is, which is good for people like me who can't be mowing the lawn at 2 p.m. thinking about the multiverse and how high I was 2 weeks ago, but will definitely think about how many terms and conditions I've signed. And that was one of my favorite episodes that you did, was that terms and conditions bit. And I checked a box for one 45 minutes ago.
There you go.
So, I've always enjoyed your show for being something that brings a cannabis aspect to topics that can be talked about and should be talked about with or without cannabis. But this is coming from a group of people who have often been stereotyped to be disinterested in society or not the proper influence to
Sure, not engaged, not able to like reason meaningfully or fucking grapple with the problems, right? It's like, oh, it's just a stoner. They don't.
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
not ambitious. They don't, take care of business. They don't, aspire.
Yeah. And so it's that same important piece that we're adding content to the space, whether it is intentionally like, hey kid, here's how to roll a joint, or it's here is proof of a well-informed, well-educated, and opinionated pothead, and someone who is a regular cannabis consumer who is still doing their part to be in a civic society and to improve the general experience of the human existence, which I think is an important goal for all of us to have.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So I'm glad we hung out at Hempfest. Okay, and I feel like this is an extension of that hangout. I think what's interesting and hilarious is not only did we not record together during the fest, we didn't take a single photo together either, right? So nobody can actually, we could totally be putting everybody on right now. You may not have even gone to Seattle as far as these people are concerned. But I was laughing about that with Nicole after the event with my wife. because we hardly took any photos even of the family. And but it's like, why do we feel bad about that? For social media?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
okay, we have the thin excuse of saying, "Oh, well, podcast content, whatever."
Yeah,
Give me a fucking
yeah.
break. Okay, you've seen me, you've seen Matt. If you haven't, go find us on the internet. You can find us. You can see what we look like. Picture us together. Boom, you made it. Now you got the picture. All right, it's like I thought it was funny that, you know, and pleasant that it wasn't the priority for any of us to worry about that formality. Um, Not that having a photo together wouldn't be lovely. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, but it was like, we were just living. We were doing our thing. We sessioned. We smoked. We looked at each other, you know? Um, it was a good thing. So I'm not even bummed about it. You know what I mean? We'll get a picture next time. So,
Yeah. Exactly. And with all of that being said, and we had a really good time at Hempfest. I had a really good time at
yep.
Hempfest. And I enjoyed just hanging out and being able to walk around and talk about growing, talk about cannabis, talk about strains, talk about companies and industry. And I really enjoyed Hempfest for that. Being someone who spends a lot of time at different festivals, whether it's music festivals, whether it's local festivals, just through my radio career, I end up in a lot of these places spending a lot of time. And so it's become something that I really enjoy. Festivals are one of my favorite experiences. And whether that's a large scale rock festival or a small venue metal festival or a local street fair or the local fall fest, whatever that may be, I enjoy going out and being in that atmosphere. And I had a really good time at Hempfest for that. But I know one of the things that you were saying almost immediately when I got there was how down the attendance was over years past. And this was my first Hempfest. I've
right.
been to Seattle once before, but it was in late October, which it turns out I enjoy late October Seattle weather significantly more than mid-August Seattle weather.
Yep.
But it was my first Hempfest, and I am assuming not your first, being that you are from Seattle and work in the I-502 industry.
Sure. I think it's only like my fourth or, maybe fifth of all time, with the first one probably coming within like 2 or 3 years of the event starting. So I went to an early Hempfest that, to the best of my recollection, was around 94 or 95. And I believe the event began in 92. Which I would have been a graduating senior back in 92 to date myself, from high school. But
Sure.
went early. That back in that era, what we had in 95 was we didn't even have decriminalization yet here. We didn't even have our medical up and running here yet. In terms of medical cannabis here in Washington. So I guess what I'm pointing out here is that Hempfest began as a protestival, right?
Yeah.
An activist event designed to raise awareness, designed to normalize people's perceptions, designed to, destigmatize cannabis and cannabis lifestyles for people. So people came down to the first Hempfests and puffed tough in large numbers out in public on purpose in broad daylight for probably the first time in, I don't know, 20, 30 years in this region, if ever, especially with that stated purpose and mission in mind on the back end, right? So they went and, anybody who was down there was lightly exposing themselves to some risk, legally speaking, by going down there and partaking in that particular way. And there was police presence, as far as I can recall, from day one. And there certainly was back in 95 when I went through. And back in those days, I was just a beginning smoker. And, I was that pissant friend of the real smoker who would pinch nugs off my buddy's stash to replenish my stash kind of scene. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like, hey man, come
yeah.
on, here I got $5. Send me home. Come on, give me hook it up. I need a bowl for the road. Whatever.
Yep.
Um, and so that's the guy I was at that time. And so I went once. Was probably lightly overwhelmed by the sheer number of granola hippies that were there at the time. And didn't go back for a long time, right? Because I mean, it just was probably a little scary initially. Because like I said, shit wasn't legal. So
Yeah.
you go to the fest, you see it all, you get in and get out unscathed, but you saw 200 cops on the way in and on the way out, and you knew a few people were probably getting, jammed up here and there for being idiots on the street, having their shit out of their bag or selling on the street. So one big thing that used to happen going to Hempfest, and one thing I noticed I did not see any of this year, you used to see people like 5 blocks out and on their way in, like vending on the streets. And so
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the little vendor shit that you see inside the festival here, and like the water bottle guy who was right outside the north entrance, it would have been like 5 blocks of those guys, and interspersed with the water bottle vendors and the people selling cannabis, Bob Marley scarves or bandanas, and cannabis leaf lays and things like that to put on, and your fucking weed leaf sunglasses so you can get your
Yeah,
swag
yeah.
for the fest. All that bootleg stuff is all gone on the streets, and crucially, there was a ton of edibles sellers
Yeah, there
and bag
was.
sellers. Okay,
Yeah.
going approaching the event. And so you knew you were on the right track because these people would be like, "Yeah, it's that way. Yeah, hey, fucking need a bag, man. Got that gas, whatever, and they have it." So, and of course, back then when I was a kid, I was too scared and too broke to really fuck with any of them. But I did buy a brownie one year. So on
Yeah.
one of my later, more recent visits, so there was still a little bit of that going on in more recent years, maybe around 2012, 2013. Because so the event the event in the early days was a protest. It was well attended, and it was, it had a lot of energy behind it, and it, I think, helped directly lead, um, directly or indirectly, but I think somewhat directly lead to the Western Washington, mindset paradigm changing, in the general public, to the point where they're like, well, evidently that's what all these kids do around here. It's what everybody does around here, and the region sort of admitted to itself that it liked the shit, and was
Yeah.
like, we don't hate these people. They're not that bad. Let's let them have their medical, So in '98, we got, I think, through a few years of things like Hempfest, and then runs at bills trying to go through to our legislation. We got something off the ground in 1998 that then became our, the 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 larger cannabis market that eventually developed into our legal recreational market today. I don't know if we can call it developed into, or if it got like just totally displaced and taken over. That's a matter of ongoing discussion and debate. But the event starts out as a protest, gets really strong, makes progress. We got medical, but we didn't have recreational for everybody yet, right? People were still getting arrested, at times for having it, or having it in your car. I know I got one, uh, possession, one time in my life because of a traffic stop with a negligible amount of shake in the bottom of a stash box in the console. Nobody was demonstrably high.
Yeah.
Didn't have enough to, I didn't have ounces in the trunk or anything. So it was just a simple like, hey, you got weed, bad, bad, bad. You got to go to court. You got to pay money. I could take you to jail. All that stuff. And you know, as we know, that's the fate. All those threats are taken out real on people to this day all over this country still. And there's still plenty of ways in Washington where you can, get in trouble that way, to this day. But we more or less decriminalized it a few years after, 98, right? And we get to a state where folks can have a little weed and not be utterly terrified that their life is going to end if they have a run-in with law enforcement for some reason or other. So I guess what I'm saying is what we saw this weekend, like to jump forward a little bit, we got our medical in 98. We went full legal recreational here in Washington. We voted for it in 2012. And that's when I probably went back to Hempfest first, most recently. And then it did feel really like at its height, at its zenith at that time, because we were making that push for recreational, but we didn't have the stores yet. But there was plenty of medical weed around. People were doing what they, needed to do to access the medical weed, either through friends who were legitimate patients or through, coming to a greater understanding of their own, personal needs and deciding to try cannabis instead of, Western opioids or some other, horror that our doctors would otherwise recommend for us for whatever the ailment may be. There was a lot of medical going on there, and that was bleeding out into the gray market to the rest of us. And so Hempfest back in that era was much bigger than it probably is today, because I think in 2014, when our first stores opened, we got to a new place now where all of a sudden we get stores just like liquor stores. The in Washington State, our old liquor control board took over the cannabis enforcement side. So today it's known as the Liquor and Cannabis Board here in Washington. So now anybody over 21 can purchase legally here in Washington State, and all you need is a valid ID. You've been able to visit a couple stores on your recent visit, so you see what is going on there. It's a pretty decent experience for the public right now.
Yeah.
This has been pretty much what we had since day one. Like it took like 2 or 3 months to get edibles up and running in the state, I think, after they opened the stores with like flour and pre-rolls and some basic stuff. But we had concentrates almost from day one in the stores in 2014. So concentrates being our dabs, our oils and cartridges, right? So we had that right from the start. We had edibles within 2 or 3 months. Edibles including, as too, beverages, right? So we've got, baked goods, and we've got lozenges, and we've got beverages, and we've got tinctures, and we've got subdermal patches, and you name it. So what does that do to an event like Hempfest that sort of relied on, in the past, the powerful novelty that was going to Hempfest and smoking outdoors, meeting and seeing other cannabis enthusiasts in public? Today I can go all sorts of different places and attend cannabis lifestyle themed, events if I want to do it that way. Or without even worrying about it, just go out and hang out in your normal social circles, and what you're seeing is vastly more open use of cannabis by different people than you ever expected, and many of whom are newer and coming to it later in life, and in most cases really excited and proud that they figured it out and that they're trying it out. And look at my CBD lotion that I've got, and check out my bong. I went back and bought a fucking bong 2 months later because that was working so great. I decided to try the real thing, and this is some, in the case of you younger guys, some 40-something-year-old like me, or in the case of a guy like me, I'm seeing, granddad age people, aunties, coming out of the woodwork who are like, oh, you want to know something really cool? I found this, and it is just great for my hot flashes. And it's some 1-to-1 CBD, THC tincture that she puts in her smoothies in the morning, before she goes off to, mall walk or Pilates or whatever, and that those are both very, condescending, assumed activities for older ladies. They're probably going out and kicking my ass and riding bikes and doing triathlons and climbing mountains and shit. So please, ladies, I'm very sorry. I apologize. So what does that do to Hempfest, though, right? We saw it. people can hang out in cannabis culture every day around here now. People travel to the Pacific Northwest 12 months a year right now to experience that culture. It represents, many millions of dollars of business per year around here, for sure. Already did, had, and was, and been done, but now we're tracking those numbers in, really like much more visible ways, right? Because we have real stores that have publicly reporting sales, and we know Washington, like exceeded $1 billion in countertop sales dollars last year, retail. So that is just one of many markets that is being identified all around the country right now, right? That is changing the whole country's mindset as pertains to cannabis. So Hempfest, a protestival, is kind of left in a way like I feel like the last few years, and I think they're telling us the same message with their continuous, conversations up on the main stage, that they're not getting the support that they used to get. So like everything I just said is all true, right? It's great, and you can travel here, and you can stay at cannabis friendly Airbnbs, and you can go on cannabis garden tours, and you can go on cannabis and wine tasting events and all sorts of stuff with private groups, and it's just the beginning of this market, right? Even with none of that, you just come into town and do a tour of 10 stores over the course of a weekend if you want to. You don't have the burning drive for most folks to be worried about the few folks who are still sitting in jail for this right now, and it's not a few, it's jillions, right? And all the people who could still get in big trouble for it. They don't care about the fact that none of the businesses that are involved in this so-called legit regulated industry are allowed to take any of the normal federal tax deductions for their businesses whatsoever. Most of them aren't allowed to bank properly with normal banks, with FDIC insured banks. They're forced off with, funny credit unions and, a lot of cash transactions, right, in the industry. And all of that is really problematic still. More importantly, though, I think the continued criminalization and the lack of 50 state legality, as I'm saying this, we're sitting here, one day after, at least in my news feed, seeing something about California passing a bill in the Senate to seriously ease, tens of thousands of convictions for people, and they won't have to appear in court for this. They won't have to hire a lawyer for this. Apparently the DA's office at the state level of California. So I guess it's not a state's attorney, not a district attorney, but they're gonna fucking reach out to these people and let them know that their sentence has been reduced, commuted, expunged, whatever it may be. And I think it's going to take different forms in different cases, and it's not being applied to everybody globally. But that's huge progress, and they're not the first to do that. I think we have one legislator here in Washington who's advocating for that, but I don't think we've seen action really on it yet here.
Yeah.
Get back to you on that. But so what did we see? A lot of great food, some okay bands. I don't know if you've probably been to a lot more festivals than I ever have, but I love that long and narrow format that they have going with that particular park. It's a coastal park. It's a local Seattle park called Myrtle Edwards Park, and it's towards the north end of the downtown Seattle waterfront strip. So directly leading into it, you can go to a ton of total Seattle touristy, staple destinations like the Seattle Aquarium and Ivers and the Great Wheel, the Seattle Ferris Wheel and stuff like that. So you keep going north along the waterfront, you hit Myrtle Edwards. To your left, as you walk north, you have the coast, as you know, and
Mm-hmm.
we see some of the cruise ships, right? Because we're close to the cruise ship docking areas there at that north end of the, I guess it's the sound, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to the right you have the whole city going up the hill to your right. So just to paint a slight picture for everybody. So I always associate most other festivals with like giant open spaces, like huge arena type things and pastures and fields. And Hempfest is kind of neat in that it has this long and narrow uh, format, and they have 2 or 3 stages interspersed as you go north deeper into the festival, with the main stage being sort of in the middle, right? Um,
Yeah.
and So, like, I couldn't ask for a better or cooler location. I think they've got one of the best locations ever. They moved it 1 year, by the way. It either moved 1 year or 2 years, because the city was kind of like annoyed with Hempfest for a while there and busting balls and trying to get it out of there.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of public support for it too, and um, for whatever reason, they ended up moving for a couple of years to try out this other location, and I think it was like Volunteer Park at the top of the hill, and not a bad park either, but it just wasn't the same event up there. They fortunately were able to move it back down there after just a couple of years of like instability there, um, and I think it's kind of signature to their experience, in a way. I don't know, if it was intentional or not. I'm sure it was just serendipitous or coincidental, but I thought it was a cool format, in terms of the layout. Uh, but yeah, they're asking continuously for support. They sound like donations are down over the last 3 or 4 years, they said. Um, and to hear the Hempfest folks tell it, they're saying the event's in trouble, right? That this might even be the last year. So that was concerning to hear this year. I've heard them, skirt around that in the last couple of years. Because again, I've only gone like 4 or 5 times, but I have gone a lot more in the last couple of years, because why not, right? It's a great and sensible thing for anybody working in cannabis to go and do.
Yeah.
It's a free convention, more or
Mm-hmm.
less, right? So if you have other industry conventions, which we have, CanaCon, MJ BizCon, this one con and that con, all over the place, Indo Expo, whatever, they all cost a little money, and you know none of them are as they're not festivals, they're cons, but this is a festival that you can work like a con if you want to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the interesting thing about Hempfest to me, being someone who I've gone to, I mean, I think that I tend to stay on about a festival a month streak
Wow.
from any time from early spring, April, through late fall, to when it gets a little bit too cold. Take the winter off, but and whether that's a music festival or, like I said, just a local street fair, or a street festival or something like that, and even a county fair, any of those things, like I spend a lot of time at all of those places. And what Hempfest really reminds me the most of, interestingly enough, is that street fair, like a community street fair.
Yep.
The where I went to college, in Ohio, was local to a place that had the Circleville Pumpkin Festival, which was a very popular weekend fall event that everyone was very, very into. And the Pumpkin Festival was no more than an excuse to walk the streets of an impoverished factory and farm town, who grew a lot of pumpkins. And so they
Nice.
will, have all of the local businesses have their booths out front of their stores, and then they have some bands and some pumpkin judging things and maybe a parade one day, and it lasts for the weekend and everybody has a blast, yada yada yada.
Right.
And so Hempfest, to me, fits much more in that category than it does like a major rock festival, something like Louder Than Life in Louisville, Kentucky, or Rocklahoma in Oklahoma, Rock in Rio, Rock on the Range, any of those major rock festivals, they have a different, and I think it's interesting you brought up the shape, because I think that's a key part, is that the music festivals have a different shape than these street fairs. Street fairs have your long shape,
some of them might
like,
have little branches, if they're 2 blocks long or something like that, do the little H, and you can do a snake or whatever. But yeah, no, they're narrower, right?
yeah, and a music festival, you're looking at a big oval at minimum. Like, it's a street fair is a tree branch, and a music festival is a spider web. You've got your central, you've got your main stage, and then you've got your other things. Right. And what that does is that your music festivals, there's a main central hub. It's where you hang out, and the rest of it is just kind of around. Maybe you end up there, and if you end up there, you tend to stay there for a while. Versus something like Hempfest that's set up in this big long streak, which encourages you to walk the whole way down and visit all the stands and see all there is to see, because it's easier. It's not confusing. You don't have to know where your center is, and it doesn't feel like an event to get somewhere because it's one big long street. And so I think that Hempfest has a really good setup, and I want to compliment Hempfest in that they really utilize their space well, because they managed to have a central hub with the main stage right there by the pedestrian bridge that comes in on the northwest entrance, perhaps. I don't remember which one that is. But
they did, yes. That's the one we came in to.
Yeah. And so with that setup and with that in that location, you have your good, well set up event that you have a central point exists, but you can walk in either direction. It feels good to walk in either direction. There's more to see the farther down you go. Yep. There are stages spread throughout. Like, they have this great setup, and they set up their space well, but they don't, I feel, lean into the way that's set up in a way that optimizes their opportunity. And that was one of the things I noticed while I was over there, is that they have this great street festival feel, but they treat it not really like that. They treat it like a music festival where they have a bunch of stages for places, or for people to be. And I noticed that in the scheduling of the stages. Every speaker has a 5-minute block, and then there's a new person on stage, and a new person on stage, and it's this constant roll of people, which is cool and interesting if you have a stage that people are going to stay at for a while.
Yep.
But Hempfest isn't set up to sit and stay for a while.
Nope.
Maybe you sit down by a tree to eat your food. Maybe you sit down in the field to smoke a quick bowl. Maybe you sit over by the waterfront to watch the waves and the boats go by and smoke a little bit. Whatever it is. But you're not spending 2 to 3 hours sitting in one spot, listening to what people are telling you, or listening to music that's being played. And so I think that the way their schedule encourages people to just walk right by the stages. But at the same time, the main protest part of the protestival, what is the main mission and the main goal, and what is telling people, there is a reason that we need to still have this festival. We do still need to protest about this. We have this, like, we do still need to, we do still need to be active. We do still need to be activists. We do still need to be donating, so on and so forth.
But people aren't, right?
Exactly.
So they're not to the extent that they were, because they feel like it's all been fixed.
Yeah.
They feel like we did it.
So I look at Hempfest as this way to tell people, okay, we did that, but we do still need to do more. And where I think they're missing that opportunity is in the way that they're scheduling their stages and their schedule of events. Because if you create a reason for people to stop and stay for a while, they will. if you say this person is going to have a 20-minute, like, come see this person talk for 20 minutes at this stage at this time, people will go because that's a reason.
Right.
It's an event.
Right.
But if it's just, hey, between 4 and 4:30, these 15 people.
It's going to be a parade of frantic yellers coming through, and then we're going to take a hour break for music, and then later more hurried speech. It's not frantic yellers, but it's hurried speeches for sure. It's now maybe we're all right. So I think there is something to be said for short format, engagements, for sure, because it does let people, hear a little something and then move on, and they didn't miss a whole, huge rest of a speech from somebody. Like, I get that on one level, but I hear you too. Like, so many of these people probably had a lot more that they could say and do for folks. Of course, outdoor festivals, like, how many of them are, they're not, it's not an expo, it's not a convention, it's not a, like, weekend paid retreat or seminar or clinic or training program. It's like you walk into a pop-up Disneyland for cannabis, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'm with it on that level, because they do work all year round. All right, we all don't know this. We all don't bother. We don't know what Hempfest is about, but they work 12 months out of the year. They talk to legislators all the time. They talk to the industry all the time. They have their own, retail store that's not a cannabis store even to this day, right? There's no Hempfest weed shop that you can go to. All right, they didn't go that route, and they probably could have. We talked about that briefly.
Yeah.
That organization could have reinvented itself probably a few years back when we legalized and decided to get a license and pursue a license and be a retailer right now if they wanted to be. But they didn't. They stayed, the type of group that they were, the type of organization that they are. And so they have the festival, which has been enormously successful for a very long time, but which I feel like what you saw last weekend was a already event that's been in trouble for a couple of years. And so the experience that you got to see is already less than the best that I feel they've done in the past, right? At their zenith, they got bigger named guests and speakers, of course, to come to the event in the first place. And it was, of course, better attended by more people. And that necessarily would probably contribute to the type of, like, vendors and everything that would make it. Although, our legal industry is pretty heavily represented there at this point in time. I don't know, but yeah, well, so, because we're, probably talking about it for longer than I thought we would in terms of, like, getting to it, but we haven't, we barely just got to the heart of it, right? Is, what's the opportunity here for them to combine their, maybe they don't call it a combined mission. I feel like part of it is like the awareness and the festival side, the fun side, and letting people just have fun and celebrate once a year that it even exists and that we do it and that we can do it the way we can up here. But the other side, of course, is the day-to-day hard grind of improving things for people. Like, we still can't legally smoke publicly like you can in bars here, okay, for example. Huge difference in rights for an adult cannabis user, right? And a adult alcohol consumer, for example.
Yeah.
For social opportunities and outlets. So, and because of that, there's one big place where an otherwise totally legal person can find themselves in trouble with the law because you tried to smoke outside the bar in the alley, or next to a fucking lamp post so you didn't have to go in the alley and get attacked. you know?
Yeah.
So, that's, something that should still be pointed out that, hey, the laws we've got are still heavily askew and kind of curtailing our rights, if you want to call it a right, which, I tend to think of it that way. That being the right to consume something like cannabis or, a number of other, perfectly harmless, but for some reason, all right, perfectly harmless, whatever, uh, well, ostensibly deadly if you listen to the powers that be,
Yeah.
substances that nevertheless most folks who do have experience with them firsthand, who aren't afraid of them and who have taken the risk of encountering them in their personal lives, know that they don't have to be deadly and that you can be a great person and interact with any number of substances besides alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine, and have, a fulfilling life that doesn't have to hurt other people to do it, other than the fact that they needlessly criminalize all of us, leading to all sorts of ancillary horrors, So
Yeah.
people do all sorts of shitty things when you make something that they value and cherish in their life illegal and stigmatized and something to be ashamed of. Then they have to
Yeah.
go off and do shameful things to still enjoy it, and then they enjoy it guiltily, and then they process that poorly, and then they lash out at the world in all sorts of different ways because you can have 10 shows on name your cable channel of your choice, reality TV shows about or documentaries about breweries and wineries and public bars and pubs. And I mean, we've had popular TV shows that ran for whole generations in the past. Cheers, a show set in a bar. A show set
Yeah.
in a bar, that ran for 15 years. And I can think of like 4 or 5 shows that heavily drew upon that formula over the years, sitcom wise, where, there was either a recurring bar scene with the same characters who would go to their local neighborhood pub, their version of a Cheers, right? And then we'd see them out in their neighborhoods as well. Or in a couple of cases, they were pretty much in restaurants and bars as well. So, as their main setting. So, but as you pointed out, we're getting a little bit of that now with Netflix culture, right? And some internet-based cannabis, TV, so to speak, that's nevertheless definitely like hitting a lot more boxes than our phones and our YouTube screens kind of thing. So,
Yeah. So to take all of that, because interestingly, it's a good way I think to sort of wrap things together, is and sort of to bring it in a circle, I suppose, to talk about breaking that stigma and seeing cannabis come into the mainstream, and is that questionably a reason why events like Hempfest or Hempfest itself is struggling to soldier on, because there is a change in opinion, there's a break in stigma, it's becoming more mainstream, so people think, why is this so special, why is this
I think we both agree that that's going on, right?
yeah, exactly. And so to take that, I would like to offer now my quick hits on how I think Seattle Hempfest could revamp itself in 1 year and flip the festival on its head. And it is to lean into that. The fact that it's becoming a mainstream thing, that it's becoming a tourist event, that I was shocked, honestly, that as someone who traveled from the East Coast, I bumped into less people who traveled to Hempfest. And that people were so surprised that I traveled to Hempfest. Because I think to myself of something like Hempfest, where this is a reason to travel. You think of something like Lollapalooza, or you think of something like Sacramento Aftershock, or Coachella, or any of these. Burning Man is another one. These
Right.
major festival events.
Everybody's at Burning Man right now, or going to it as we speak, right?
Yeah, I believe
Yep.
so.
Yep.
Yeah. So the like the possibility for a festival to become a tourist location is huge. And I think that Seattle Hempfest has a great opportunity to do that and to remain its free protestival vibe. And that's a really cool thing. And I think is something that is possible because it's in the cannabis community. Because I
Right.
think that there are people in the cannabis community who will come to spend money at an event, but will not be motivated to spend money on going to that event, which I think is where Seattle Hempfest lies. Like they don't want to, if they're going to travel to Seattle, they're going to want to spend their money in Seattle. They're going to want to experience Seattle, and it's going to cost them a lot to get there. And so you don't necessarily need to start an admission fee on Hempfest or anything like that, which I know is one thing that I was hearing from folks that I was talking to, is that they have to keep the festival free, or they want to keep the festival free. And I think that that's a really important thing. Also, I think that I read somewhere that it changes some coatings that they fall underneath if they start to charge an
There you
admission
go.
price.
Well, and I like supporting the event, right?
Yeah.
Like I think their donation boxes are perfectly appropriate. It's a bummer to know that it's that much overhead to operate the event for them, but as we pointed out, porta potties alone, and the permits, I
Yeah.
don't even know, but I'm sure they must amount to, a not insignificant amount for that event. And I haven't put on an event that approaches the size of Hempfest. I've done, some very small events in the past, private events, and, none of them have been trivial in terms of overhead at all. So when you think of something like Hempfest that definitely, I would imagine, needs 12 months out of the year maintenance just to get ready for each coming year. Like they're going to close out this event and they're already in email conversations and on phone calls with folks, hopefully, about what they're going to be doing together next year.
Yeah.
So
yeah. let's take what we have, and let's say that we're not going to add an admission fee or anything like that. We're not going to change anything like that. But let's take the pieces we have, and I'm going to offer my advice to rearrange them in a way I think would work better. So the main stage location is great. All the other stage locations make no sense. So the way that the Hempfest stages are set up is you walk in that first, let's call it the main gate, the one by the big statue at the north end, not the south entrance. I don't know by Seattle geography that well, but so you're coming in the south entrance, and the first thing that you're coming to is the speaker tent, and kind of tucked behind the trees. So that's a great location. There should be a lot of cool things happening there, but it shouldn't be the first thing that you walk in the door to, because there's no reason for people to stumble into it first thing. It's not profoundly attractive. It's not something that screams interest from the inside. It's something that people will stumble into if you put it a little later in the festival. But if it's the very first thing they walk into, they're going to think, oh, but I want to grab food. I want to see some of the vendors. I want to go listen to the music that I hear from across the way.
We can't stop at this one. We got to keep going. Yeah, they're like, we got to go past this one. There's so much more festival. We got to keep going.
Yep. So Hempfest this year had 3 music stages, and it was set up as like a main stage, stage number 2, and then that other stage that nobody cares about. So take that other stage. That was
the high stage. Yep.
Yeah. Take that other stage that I saw get minimal to no foot traffic, put it first thing. Because you're not going to put anybody on that stage that is going to be your main person. But you might put somebody on that stage who's going to capture the attention of somebody walking through the door. And that front stage is where you can put all of your 5-minute enthusiastic yellers. everybody who has a really good 5-minute pitch, who can get up there and say, this is why you should care, this is yada, 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 5 minutes, boom, next one. Because that's all the longer people are going to want to spend there. They're going to say,
and
hey,
if the entry experience is sort of designed in such a way that everybody who's on their way in and not quite through the donation boxes and the turnstiles yet can hear, and there's a couple quick things that they need right there as soon as they get in, like a few portas and the first of the food vendors who are also right next to that spot, then sure, right? And I mean,
yeah,
we had some of that kind of going up there, right, at the south end. So there, but I think that's a pretty straight shot in because you go past through the sculpture park.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So Anyway, okay. So go ahead.
Yeah. So there's thing one, and you don't really need to change the scheduling of that stage. You want to have whatever local bands want to play, grab them, fine, put them up there. 15, 20 minute, 30-minute set, throw 8 more speakers on there, no problem. So next thing that we come up to is the main stage. As it is set up now, I think main stage location is great. I think that's a perfect place for it to be. I like all the food leading up to it. I think it's great. It's definitely the main hub. And what's great about it is that everything funnels into it, and it's the biggest space. Since it's the biggest space, everybody feels comfortable going into it. But once you're into it, it's a little too busy, so everybody wants to get out and they go see the rest of the festival. And it's good planning, well spaced out. Leave the main stage there. We're going to change the whole schedule of the main stage. 5 minutes of shouting and a band for half an hour doesn't make sense on what you call the main stage, because that's side stage scheduling. It doesn't, So you're going to schedule 20, 30-minute speakers and then a band on the hour for half an hour. And that's where you're going to start to grab some of the Seattle bands that people know, because you're in Seattle, which arguably has one of the best underground local scenes in the country, if not in the world. There are not many places that stand up to the local scene like Seattle. And not only do you have Seattle, but you have Portland right across the way. Certainly people will drive from Northern California. Even the Spokane and the country scenes in the early 90s are huge, and it's just it's a musically driven place.
Right.
You're going to find enough bands that are going to draw some sort of a crowd.
Shoot, if you embrace the country folk, you'd get a whole bunch of different people in there too. So, that's a really interesting idea. I like the sound of that a lot, because you're right. I did notice that Hempfest was up against one of a series of concerts that KEXP throws all summer long on Fridays. So that was interesting. I don't know that it went on Saturday or Sunday, so they probably aren't competing all weekend against another local juggernaut. But you may be aware KEXP is probably our biggest local quasi-public radio station. That kind of embodies that indie music culture scene here. And I think I noticed no real association with KEXP going on at Hempfest at all, right? I didn't.
Not a one. And that's thing number 2. Not a single local media correspondent was set up with Hempfest. I didn't see a single one. I didn't see news all weekend long.
Yeah, I didn't really see news trucks at the entrances that we came and went from this year either.
Nope, didn't see news trucks, saw no radio stations, saw no TV crews, saw no nothing. Now, I don't know the local media scene in
the past.
Seattle.
I believe it's been always, covered at least a little bit.
But what I know is that typically, if you want your event covered, all you have to do is ask. There's never so much going on that the news won't cover you.
Damn.
It's just
That's awesome.
In the world of the 24-hour news cycle, all you got to do is ask.
Wow.
So there should have been somebody there. And I don't know that they could have gotten a radio station in there, but I'd be shocked if they couldn't have, especially because there are just so many radio stations. Seattle is the number 17 radio market in the country.
Right, so you would think any little radio station around here is talking to tens of thousands of people at any given time and is saying, hey, we're down at Hempfest.
Exactly.
Come and
Yep.
see us
And that's all you
here at
need.
Hempfest.
So none of that's there. So let's take the main stage again, and we're gonna book a headliner for each night because
There you
you
go.
need a reason for people to be there all day.
And
there just
again,
isn't one of those.
you were there even more than I was this last weekend. I was there on Friday and again on Sunday. Spent a good amount of time on Sunday, right? But I didn't notice that on the schedule of events, like in a particularly big way. And maybe I'm just not as connected to the music scene as I should be these days and not current. And maybe some of these bands that did play are a lot more of a big deal locally than I thought. I didn't find myself like arrested and stopping in front of the stage and being like, "Who the fuck is this? This is amazing.
Yeah.
We're going nowhere, you guys. We're staying right here. For
Yeah.
however long this person's on." I don't know. So.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that it's set up. Because if you tell a band that has any sort of social influence that they're just playing at 1:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday, there's not going to be a lot of motivation there.
Mm-hmm.
So, have a couple of bands to play during the day, but slide most of your bands back into the evening. And
right?
You're going to want a headline band, and you're going to want...
daytime can be the education part of the festival, and the evening is the music festival part of the festival.
Yeah, and you're gonna want your headline band, and you're gonna want a keynote speaker for every night, and those can be local people.
Mm-hmm.
Seattle, like I said, Seattle's got a great local scene, and most of your foot traffic is from Seattle anyway. It's a huge city, so get a large-ish Seattle band. Ask them if they want to play, and my bet is they're gonna want to play. I would be very surprised if bands would turn down opportunities from Hempfest. You do a local band Friday, you do a local band Saturday, and then you get a very small band with some sort of national traction from somewhere else to play on Sunday as your big headliner. You set it up that way. Each night you have a keynote speaker. One night it's the city mayor, the local legislator, whoever that may be.
Sure.
Another night it's somebody from the cannabis community. Somebody with a large name in cannabis entertainment.
Yeah, maybe somebody with a large following online. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And Sunday, if you can swing it, you get some sort of small time celebrity, Woody Harrelson.
Right, a national interest of some kind.
Exactly. You stack that on your main stage. You give people a reason to come to the festival. You give people a reason to stay at the festival.
And to come all the way through Sunday, as
exactly.
you point out. Yep.
Yeah, to make a weekend out of it, to make an event out of it.
Right.
So you do all that. All right, main stage set, done, easy, moving on. Next stage was where stage number 2 is. That's where the speaker tent should be. Because right back there where Dope Land was, I don't know, did you go to any of the Dope Cup judging or any of that? So I spent a little time over there, but was over just, it's like halfway between the main stage and the end of the festival. It's getting a huge amount of foot traffic. It's in a beautiful location. You're right on the waterfront. There's not a lot of tree cover or anything to look through. Not that there's a lot of tree cover on the waterfront in Myrtle Edwards Park anyway, but it's just a good location. And put the speaker tent there. Because people are going to stumble into there. It's hot. They've been at the main stage for the last hour and a half, and they're ready to move. And they're going to see a big tent with a lot of shade, and it's right after the food. So they're going to get their food. They're going to go sit at the tent for a little while. And now you have people listening to your panel discussions and your big draw in education and activism. You put in that tent, and it's there all day. It's the same as a comedy tent at a major music festival. A lot of festivals these days have comedy tents or acoustic tents.
Okay.
Because you're standing out in the sun all day and you got to get out of the sun, but you don't want to leave that festival vibe. So they give you a reason to sit in a tent. And there's that. And so then you take your second stage, your second most important stage, you put that way at the north end of the festival because then it gives people a reason to be there. And you put one headliner-ish band that plays at 6 o'clock on every night back at the side stage, way in the back of the festival.
Right, and I was going to say, you make them to push them all the way to the back.
Yep.
Yep. Because then they got to walk most of them who came in on the south end, they got to walk all the way back through one last time to get back to their cars.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I do like the multiple entrances and exits, and I like being able to come in from the north and work it to the south.
Yeah.
That would work out great for those folks, maybe, for the end of the night. If they stay for the end of the night and they came from that side, they'll be able to piece out a little easier. You could always just close those exits at night and be like, everybody's got to walk out the south.
Yeah. And then you put some you gotta put some weird shit on one of the stages. You gotta have a Hempfest yoga. Like, there's gotta be a yoga instructor up on a stage doing group yoga.
Some
There's
Tai
gotta
Chi.
you gotta have a drum circle of some. You gotta lean in to. I mean, it is what it is.
That's not a bad idea. They don't really do well. You were there, later than me, on a couple of those nights, so you didn't see that breaking out spontaneously or anything.
No,
there was.
there were.
If
there was
they had
a jam
if they
session
had a fire
every once
pit
in a
or
while.
two. Well, see, it was so hot. It was so
Yeah.
hot. It was still hot. You could have fire dancers though and stuff like that, and fuck with that
Yeah.
at night. I like it.
Yeah. And so there's my quick hits on how to fix Hempfest. You don't really need to get anything you don't already have. You don't necessarily need to spend that much more money because you keep it local. You build for a couple years. Eventually you get back to the point where you're bringing in headliners that people know, but you got to build. You got to work with the new orientation for a
Right.
little
I mean,
while.
I feel like their mission can't go away. The message doesn't change. The fight isn't over. I would hate to see the event go away. I feel like the event is, part of Seattle and is to be celebrated. And, it's like 25 years old, and I want to see it get to 75 years old.
Yeah.
Or 50, because you're right. It should be a reason for people to travel. It should be a reason for people to, if you can come for a whole week and explore the Northwest, even outside of Hempfest, but then make Hempfest the height of your visit. When people go to California to go to Disneyland, I think a lot of folks don't tactically fly in and fly out and never go anywhere else in California. They get a fucking minivan and load the family up and go find the redwoods. They go head to a few of the other, sites that they can get to while they're in Cali. You don't come that far and go to that much trouble and just do that, right? So you come to the Pacific Northwest in August for Hempfest, but go, bike riding, go get to Mount Rainier, get on a duck tour. Hopefully, fingers crossed, knocking on wood for all of you guys, they stay safe and don't sink.
Here.
Maybe not the duck tour. Do something. There's ferries to ride. They sink much less frequently. Let's see. There's lots of great things to do here. You can get on little really cool seaplanes and fly out to the San Juans and fly up to Victoria, BC, in a day while you're here, and still be back for dinner, at your waterfront B&B. So there's a lot to do here. Come on out. And make something like Hempfest the center of it. I think it's, an event that we're lucky to have. And I was like just a little bit bummed this year, feeling the vibe. I think you're right though. They need to keep grinding it out. They need to reinvent. They need to re-energize, not quit in the meantime, because there were people there. Okay. Okay, attendance was down, but there was a shitload of people there still, you guys, compared to, many thousands of people attended the event over the course of the weekend. I don't know what their real attendance numbers are. We don't have that at either of our fingertips right now for this conversation. But, if I could just have an event half that size that stays alive year in and year out, that would still could be potentially an important event. It could be an event that contributes continually to the culture and to furtherance of normalization and reform, and also at the same time represent an annual celebration.
Yeah.
So.
And So that's, I 100% agree with you. Hempfest was my vacation this year. It was the big thing that I did
love
this
it.
year.
Love it.
And it was just because I wanted to. I wanted to come out and experience it and see it firsthand, being from the East Coast and not being. I have not been back to the West Coast since I became a regular cannabis consumer, a regular pot smoker. I was the last time I was in Seattle was for a conference, my like sophomore year of college. So it had been a while. And I wanted to come back and see the place and experience everything. And what I'm saying is that Hempfest was an amazing experience, and I loved every minute of it. And I think that it is a great festival, and I would highly encourage people to go and experience it and support it, because I do think it's doing a great thing, and I think it exists for the perfect reason. It's just for the continued betterment of the cannabis community, and I think that that's something that's important. You look at other major conventions, things like San Diego Comic-Con and VidCon and these other things that really almost in a way exist not only to showcase their communities, but to encourage continued improvement of its members, to say, all right, what are you going to bring back next year? How are we going to top this next year? And so you take something like Seattle Hempfest and it creates this reason for the cannabis community to continue to fight for the improvement of the legal structure, the improvement of the federal structure around cannabis, and the way it's stigmatized and all of these things. It's just for this constant state of improvement, and it's an important event, so I would hate to see it go away.
Yep.
And so I think that we can take it with the pieces that we have, and we can reorganize it and make it something completely different, but keep the same goal and use the same pieces in a different way, and rebrand it into something that is going to have staying power and is going to encourage people to come and to spend money. Because if you're going to a free festival that feels like a music festival, and you're walking out of there with 3 or 4 souvenirs, a stomach full of fair food, and you've just seen 5 different bands, you're not going to feel bad about donating to that. You're going to say, I didn't pay to get in here, but I sure did get my money's worth, and it's going to be a reason that people want to keep it going, you know, versus we're yelling into the air and hoping that you stop at the stage, and we are prioritizing our activism, but we are putting our best activists on locations where they are not going to be heard, or will struggle to appeal to an audience. And so I really commend Hempfest for all the things that they're doing, and I hope that they continue onward. And I think that that is my 2 cents on how you could reorganize the event in a new way, to keep it doing what it's needing to be doing.
Well, I think your perspective, is to be valued, especially as a friend who's come in from out of state to have this experience, and who came away with a positive experience. But, your feedback is, I think, hopefully the kind of thing that they would welcome, and I'm sure they have mechanisms for consuming, emails and suggestions and things like that from people in terms of what they experienced. I know we went ahead and, recorded this podcast, and to this time, and it's only been a few days, so sorry everybody, neither of us has reached out to, anybody at Seattle Hempfest. Matt, I'll do that on our behalf.
Sure.
Maybe after you get, this mixed down into a, a consumable chunk of this conversation. Hopefully we'll streamline it a little bit for everybody, because we're close to a couple hours of chatting, all told, but we did plenty of chit chat on the front end of this. But I'd like to let them know that we had our conversation and point them at it. And on my side, maybe I'll invite, anybody who wants to from their organization to also sit down with us and tell us
absolutely.
how Hempfest has been going in their mind for the last few years. Are our observations things that they can relate to, or are they bummed that that's what we came away with? And if so, why? I think the message that we heard loud and clear, spoken to us all weekend by people on stage, was that they're struggling there. So, and that this may be the last year of Hempfest. So, And I want to know from them, do they think it's for the same reasons I do that I've already expressed in this conversation? Um, Love to hear from them on what they've already been doing in terms of their plan for getting through the low, part of their curve and back up onto the positive side. Because I hope they're not done. I don't think they're really done. I don't think they're
No.
really done.
There's
There was
no
so
way.
many
And-
people down there. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
done.
And
But,
even if it
yeah.
even if it can't fill the same space, they can downsize. They can keep it going. There's no way that this could be the last year.
So, yeah, so I'll, we'll get the episode created and I'll let them know that it's there and that I'm right here in Seattle and I'd love to sit down with them. And, if we could do this with 2 people, we could probably do it with 3. So we could probably still remote you in for a chat if somebody wanted to sit with us.
Certainly.
Because, something that I've wanted to do and I considered doing it this year was, they offer that membership to Hempfest.
Yeah.
They offer that annual membership because, again, they're an activist organization that's trying to work for people. And the event takes 12 months to put together, I'm sure, as we've already both, expressed understanding of. So we're not trivializing, how much work it must be to do this event at all. Yeah, I'd be stoked to talk to them. So I'll put it out there and hopefully we get a positive response from them. And hopefully we can do a follow-up chat to this one, maybe even with just the output of an email conversation with them or an offline conversation. And then we come back and are able to say, hey, we did talk to Hempfest. And they didn't want to come on the podcast right now, but we talked,
Yeah. That'd be
so.
great. Yeah. Well, I think that is a great encompassing of both of our experiences at Hempfest and not only our experiences but our desire for it to continue on. And I think a good place to put a wrap on this conversation and say
a lot of good food. Keep all the food vendors there at Hempfest.
Oh, please.
Love that.
Poutine your mouth can stay.
There we go.
Yeah, that gets my endorsement.
There we go.
I'm
not gonna plug anybody. I like them all.
Yeah, I liked them all too, but Poutine Your Mouth did me real well.
There we go. Good.
Yeah.
It.
So because I was at Hempfest. I was at Hempfest all 3 days. I was there from 4:20 to close on Friday.
There we go.
Maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon until 6 on Saturday, and then from about noon to 5 on Sunday. So I was there most of the day, all 3 days, and
love it.
I was there. I was involved. I was throwing money in the box, and I was definitely doing my part to keep them going and spending my money, and came home with a bunch of great souvenirs and some awesome new glass that I'm excited to use. So Hempfest, by no means a negative experience at all. Something that I see room for improvement, and I think that they could do great by themselves to launch it into the next level.
Right.
But definitely not a bad experience. Definitely a great experience, and one that I will absolutely hope to do again.
On that point, and this is the last thing I want to mention about Hempfest that we've both forgotten to mention. There's a lot of volunteers there, and there's volunteer opportunities for everybody.
Yes.
And I'm horrible. I have yet to volunteer, and I've been close to doing so the last couple of years because I think about it more and more, and that I feel like that would be another great way to support that event. So I guess I'm saying it out loud now at this point. So I'll try to do that next year, is sign up for some volunteer shifts for the event, because I'm sure you're not under any obligation to do the whole weekend at all.
No.
So I'm gonna go figure out what I can stand and give it a shot and try to take more than one shift though and go and do it. Because I bet you we have a different festival experience doing that as well.
I can only imagine that we would. So
sorry everybody, you'll have to wait at least a year for that one. So.
Oh yeah. Well, with that, I think that we can wrap it up here, but I would love it if you could let us know all of your places to be contacted. And for those of you who have not listened to Steve's show before, I would absolutely recommend you to. And Steve, if you want to tell us the best ways to do that and the best ways to follow you in your endeavors.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. So I've been trying to simplify that footprint a lot. And you can find me in a lot of different places, but go to bakedandawake.com first and foremost. I did notice my episode play button was broken yesterday, but I'm going to fix that right now when we hang up. Don't worry about that. I'm also in Apple iTunes Store and every other podcasting platform as Baked and Awake. So, and you can find me at Instagram too, of course. We hang out a little bit on Instagram together. So if you follow Matt at Sesh Cast, you probably see me liking basically every one of his posts.
Yeah,
I see
it's
that
mutual.
shit. So, yeah. Thank you, brother. It was super great meeting and hanging out with you and Maddie at the event. You know, next time we'll just have to spend more time together. Do some stuff,
Absolutely.
do some stuff outside the festival together. And maybe we'll take a selfie.
Yeah, maybe this will be the time we remember.
There we go.
All right, man.
So I hope to talk to you soon, online, of course. And yeah, good chat.
Yeah, man. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.
And that is that, friends. I do want to say one more gigantic thank you to Steve of the Baked and Awake Show. Again, you just heard all of his show and contact information. I started communicating with Steve via Instagram, and so if you're looking for a place to start, I would start with Instagram. I have him tagged in my Instagram post. You can follow me at Sesh Cast. You can also check out some more about Steve and some more about Hempfest in the show notes of this episode. If you're unsure where the show notes are, where the best place to find them is, I would start with my website. That is seshcast.libsyn.com. Now, I had a couple of people ask me if I was in the process of putting together my own website. The answer to that question is yes, eventually. Money. That's a thing that I need. Speaking of money, I do still have that affiliate code for the Lift Innovations grinder. There will be more information about that on my Instagram, hopefully by the end of this week, maybe. So if you are interested in purchasing a grinder, check out my Instagram, and hopefully I will have something up there. I say in the car, knowing that I absolutely won't have something posted by the time this episode goes live, but I'm trying. So you can check out my show notes for episode 35 if you want more information about that. You can check out my Instagram for just more information about me, some interesting information about this episode, as well as all of Steve's contact information, and hopefully very soon some information about how to order one of my affiliate linked grinders. And last but not least, you can check out, I think I was going to say you can check out my Instagram again. I don't totally remember. I swear to God, I'm not high. I'm driving to work. I'm very much not high. Maybe that's why I'm struggling to remember all the things I need to talk about. And struggle to remember things when I am high. Struggle to remember things when I'm not that high. I don't know. Long story short, this has been Sesh Cast, and I think that it's time for me to sign off. I swear to God, I have one other thing that I was going to say that was like kind of important. Show notes. I talked about show notes. Instagram. I talked about Instagram. Oh boy. I give up. Probably not that important. So, follow me on Instagram for more information about me. Oh, stickers. It was stickers. Oh my God, it was stickers. I have stickers, and I will send them to you because I love them, and I want to spread them all over the world like my seed. So, I have sent out a couple of those already. Huge thank you to everyone who has reached out to me and asked for a sticker. I would say your names, but I don't have them in front of me because I'm driving, so I will say them next week. But if you would like a SeshCast sticker, again, you can see pictures of those on my Instagram. Just shoot me a DM on Instagram. Shoot me an email, seshcastgldlx@gmail.com. Whatever floats your boat, get in touch with me, and I will give you a sticker. Also, my real name is Matt. I think I've said that before. If I haven't, Steve did. My real name is Matt. Sorry if that was confusing. Or maybe I'll put that at the beginning of the episode. Sorry if that's confusing. My real name is Matt. There, cut that in later. Okay, I'm going to go because I have to go to work. I'll talk to you all later. I'll see you all next week. Enjoy your day. Enjoy whatever it is you're doing. I hope that you are higher than I am and that you don't have to work. Have a good day, friends. Cheers.